Yo, what is going on, everybody? Welcome back. Today we're going to be continuing on playing some more Dead Space, or the original Dead Space in this case. And for this video and live commentary, I wanted to delve more into just the world of the original Dead Space game while also comparing it to the Callisto Protocol, which very much is in the same realm as the Dead Space games. It's not obviously the same franchise, but of course, since the original creators of the first Dead Space, since they are the ones who made the Callisto Protocol, I wanted to make a comparison video today, which was also suggested by one of my viewers in my community tab, who suggested that I make a comparison video talking about just maybe some of the differences, but also some of the similarities between the Callisto Protocol and the original Dead Space, of which I have now officially completed, so I can talk on my view of each game. And to be clear, this is not meant to be a video where I overly talk about why I think one game is better than the other. It's meant to more just be a comparison video, because as it stands, I know there's going to be some people who might favor one game over the other. As it stands, I've actually talked to some people who have said that they prefer Callisto Protocol over the original Dead Space, or just the Dead Space franchise as a whole. I think having now played the original Dead Space fully through, I feel like my view on the Callisto Protocol, I think it's a lot more interesting to look at, especially considering that the Callisto Protocol very much so took a lot of inspiration from the original Dead Space, as I've talked about already on my review for the original Dead Space. If you haven't already seen that video, go check it out. I talked about how basically there were certain things in the Callisto Protocol that were like the original Dead Space in terms of the villain and his aspirations, and even like something like the final shot of the game, which is very much a inspiration to what happened in the original Dead Space game. I think that while both games are very different to each other and also very similar in some ways, I do think that fundamentally when comparing both of them, there are several things that I think both games do better than one another, to the point where it's like I could understand why certain people like one game over the other. I mean, don't get me wrong, having now played this original Dead Space game, it really has shed my light on which game is more fun, which game is more horrifying based on the genre that it's in, which is of course the horror franchise of video games. I definitely think that my view on each game is definitely going to differentiate over time the more I think I play both. For one, I would say that I think overall, if I had to pick one game that I think really nails down the horror vibes much more than the other, I think that would be the Callisto Protocol. And I know that's probably going to be a very controversial opinion to have, but having played both games fully through now, I do think the Callisto Protocol fundamentally was just way more scarier to play. Now, in fairness to myself, to be clear, I did play the Callisto Protocol first before I played any of the Dead Space games, technically. Especially the first original two. I had played Dead Space 3 already for a little bit, but that was only for a little bit, like I said. But even so, with that in mind, I do still think that the Callisto Protocol just had a better edge on the original Dead Space in terms of horror. I do think that this game, the original Dead Space, I do think it's a horrifying game to play. However, that being said, as I've touched on in my review of the game and my just overall thoughts of it, I think there were certain things that fundamentally brought it down in terms of how much it scared me or made me tense and anxious. So like the lighting, for example. The lighting in this game, I think fundamentally it's just not as good as the lighting in the Callisto Protocol. I think what makes horror movies or horror TV shows or horror games very scary to play is when you're in a state of mind that you don't know what's going to be around you. And I think with the original Dead Space, you have a good grasp on where you are in every single area that you go to in terms of the lighting. With the Callisto Protocol, sometimes it would make you want to second guess like which area you would need to go to, or maybe it would make you think that a biophage would come from a certain area that you didn't think it would be coming from. I also just think overall, Callisto Protocol, in my mind, in some cases also has a better sound design and sound mixing to it, in terms of, it is able to use the surrounding environment of the Black Iron prison that you're in to really shake you up and make you think, well, this is just a really terrible place to be in. When you're playing the original Dead Space, it's like you're on a ship that fundamentally, with the environments that you go through, it feels like a very lavish place and a nice place to be in. I mean, just look at this environment that I'm in right now. It's a very nice place to be in. Like, it's very cool. It's very lively. It's not an environment that ultimately would make you very scared if you were under attack by an alien organism. When you are in the Black Iron prison in the Callisto Protocol, I just think it's way more scarier, because for one, it's a prison that by all means put its workers, its prisoners, and everybody who was inside of it in such terrible and harsh conditions. It was by all means not a fun place to be in. That being said, though, I will say the original Dead Space has definitely put me in a place to where I want to play the game a lot more than the Callisto Protocol. And that is not necessarily meant to be a dig at the Callisto Protocol, but clearly, as you guys have seen, I've put a lot of hours into this game because I do genuinely think it is a very fun experience to have. Killing necromorphs in this game versus killing biophages in the Callisto Protocol, I mean, I'll just say it is more satisfying, even though, again, it's not as scary of an experience to fight the necromorphs as it is to fight the biophages in the Callisto Protocol. It is also very apparent, I will say too, that when comparing both games, you can very much tell, Jeez, I mean, English is hard, isn't it? You can clearly tell that both games were very much passion projects done by the creators and the developers. I think both studios, at the time when they made the game, they had a lot in mind with how they wanted to craft the universe and craft the game and the enemies, the characters that you play as and that you talk to, and just the overall design of all the levels that you have to go through to get to the final boss fights. That is, I think, for sure the one thing that I can give this game more, I can give both games more than anything, is that you can very much tell that both had a lot of passion going into them from the people who made the games. And overall, that is another reason why I think I'm very excited for the remake coming at the end of January, because it definitely looks like they wanted to make sure that that game lived up to the original. And for all we know, that remake could very well be better than both those games, because, again, from the looks of it, they just have a lot of confidence in that game as it stands right now from everything they've shown us. Graphically, it looks amazing, and it looks like it's going to improve upon some of my criticisms with this original Dead Space game that I'm playing right now. So we'll just have to wait and see. I will also say another thing that the Callisto Protocol, to me, does much better than the original Dead Space is the characters and the overall, just the overall understanding of what it is that the motivations are for why people are doing what they're doing in the game. I just think the Callisto Protocol fundamentally did a better job because, for one, again, as I've mentioned in my review of the game, I don't think there's much to Isaac Clarke in this game, and from what I've been told, he's a much better developed character in the second game, which eventually at one point I am definitely going to have to play if that is the case, so I can learn more about him and maybe get a better grasp on his character, especially since in the second game I've seen that he does talk versus in the original where he doesn't have any dialogue at all. And of course, again, this is a no-brainer, but performance-wise, of course, the original Dead Space is just so much better. I mean, this game, for a game that came out in 2008 that I'm currently playing right now on my Xbox Series S, it is just running so smoothly. It is such a cool thing to watch and play through when it does run this way. Of course, we know all about the issues that the Callisto Protocol had with performance issues, which definitely lowered it down a little bit for me. Actually, not even a little bit. It did lower it down a bit for me in terms of the quality of the experience. Now, again, to be fair, I did play the Callisto Protocol on an old Xbox One S, so even with the performance issues, it wasn't the best looking thing to look at in the world either, but graphically, the Callisto Protocol does look impressive for sure. You can't deny that. So yeah, I mean, in terms of any other differences and similarities and comparisons that you could make between the two games, okay, let me just handle you real quickly. So yeah, again, as I said, I feel like if there were any other thing that I compare with each game, it's that again they very much do feel very similar to one another. There's when you look at both games, again, you can very much tell that they are very much alike in many different ways. They have their differences, but fundamentally, when you play both games, they really do all just feel so similar to one another. Again, that's not a knock on either of the games. I think that actually works for a lot of games. Like, for example, the Titanfall franchise. The reason why I love both games is because, for one, the first game was an original concept that you just enjoyed playing all the time. And with the second game, it was pretty much the same. It was the same game, and I enjoyed it probably even more. I mean, Titanfall 2 is a fun game, but that original one is just so nostalgic to the point where it's like, I mean, man, you just can't help but admire that kind of thing, because if you make a fun first game the first time, and then you make a second one that's even more fun the second time, well, that's what you get with something like the Titanfall franchise. So yeah, I'm just genuinely curious to see what you guys would say down below in the comments. I mean, it's already been a while since the Callisto Protocol came out, so I'm sure a bunch of people have played it already. Of course, the original Dead Space has been out for a very long time, and so I'm sure enough people have been able to gather their thoughts on that game as it is. I'm sure it would be for a very interesting conversation in the comments. Of course, as long as we can have discussions with each other in a respectful manner, that is all that I would like to see. And so yeah, let's just be sure that we do that, guys, because it would very much be appreciative of myself if we can talk to each other in a respectful manner, no matter where our differences lie on how we look at both games. Oh my god, every time with this damn thing, man. Again, I am so curious to see what something like that looks like in the remake. Which actually, the more I think about it too, that's another thing that I think the original Dead Space has over the Callisto Protocol, is that it had moments like that, you know, just came out of nowhere and ultimately made it seem like there was something way more bigger at hand than just your usual biophages that you play against and you fight against in the Callisto Protocol. But okay, that's enough for me now. I think I've definitely dragged this off a little bit too long. Again, let me know down below in the comments what your thoughts are on this. Let's compare both games and talk about each one. So again, I hope you all have a great rest of your days. I hope you enjoyed the video. Comment down below, like the video if you enjoyed. Subscribe to the channel if you are new and would like to see more. And yeah, guys, this is Orion, and I'm signing out.